Let's bring in Middle East analyst Micah Halpern, and we're also joined by Khalid El-Jindi. He's a non-resident fellow at the Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution and author of Blind Spot: America and the Palestinians from Balfour to Trump. Welcome to both of you. Micah, we'll start with you here on set. First, what do you think about this draft plan as it was published by Israel Hayom newspaper? As we heard from Dan Raviv, it's a right-wing newspaper known for its support and connection to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Could it be that the Trump administration is trying to feel the ground in Israel ahead of the release of the plan?
Well, there are two caveats before we even begin discussing this. The first and most important is that not a lot of press has covered this story. And so when you look through the Arabic news and you look through the English news, you look through the Hebrew news, and it's not a big issue. Israel Hayom covered it, but not many others. We have a Reuters report. We have a report out of Turkey. So I think it's important to recognize. Now, obviously, Israel is somewhat preoccupied with their celebrations of independence, but nonetheless, the internet is still working. The next is that this is an interesting idea to talk about, interesting ideas. But when it comes to hard news because of this, we're really going into quicksand, because we don't know if this is news or not. And that's important to recognize as a caveat. That said, there are a lot of interesting parts about the deal, and both sides are going to be upset by it. That's a good thing.
All right, Khalid, we want to go to you. What do you think about this idea of creating a new Palestine that was listed in this report?
Yeah, I mean, preface.
Khalid, unfortunately, we can't hear you. So great. Micah, we'll take it back to you. What do you think about using monetary incentives in order to, create this new Palestine? And what could it be? According to what was published in the plan, Israel will be able to annex most of the Jewish settlements in the West Bank. Will it be something that the Israelis and Palestinians will agree to?
One of the most important tools that the United States has, not just in Israel and Palestine, but with regard to their diplomacy across the world, is the stick of monetary support. So it's important that they actually step up. The problem is, and Dan Raviv actually referred to this, aid to Israel is not determined by the president or his son-in-law. It's determined by Congress. And it would be very difficult this is law. This is the way law works in the United States. So it would be very difficult, as the way I see it, that it would almost nearly impossible that Congress would reject Israel monetary support.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to ask you about the threats made by the leader of the Islamic Jihad that war will erupt this summer. Somehow Islamic Jihad and Hamas have started dictating the agenda, how the day looks in Israel. Israelis are very frustrated over this, and they're urging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu do something, act more aggressively.
Well, it's actually sort of interesting. So there are two elements to the question that are worth answering. The first is the timing element, the summer. When you look at the history of these kinds of issues, they happened in the spring and summer. So he's not that far off in terms of predictions. Secondly, he has his finger on the scale. That is, he literally can say he can increase the intensity, and as he increases the intensity, like lobbing or launching 700 rockets into Israel, could easily shift Israel into a reaction. And if he does that, then it would be a devastating reality, and indeed, it could not move into war, but we'll say an advanced form of an operation.
Mm-hmm. Khalid, we'll try to take it back to you if you can hear us. Well, the Islamic Jihad has proven to be a force to be reckoned with within the latest escalation in the Gaza Strip. How is Israel supposed to negotiate any kind of peace when the Palestinians are speaking in so many different voices? You have President Abbas, you have Hamas, you have the Islamic Jihad.
Yeah, it's true. Palestinian division has been a major obstacle to any kind of diplomatic process for the past 12 years. But that certainly never stopped past presidents from trying to forge ahead. I think for a lot of people, and this is really part of what my book discusses, is for a lot of U.S. officials, Palestinian division was seen as an asset to the peace process, whereas we now know that it is a major detriment. The reality is that Israel has also, with its policy of divide and conquer, has encouraged this division. We've heard statements from Prime Minister Netanyahu more or less to that effect, that part of the reason that he's allowing money into the Hamas government in Gaza is to ensure that that government stays in place, and so that we don't have a unified Palestinian political leadership, and therefore ruling out the possibility of a Palestinian state. But I want to go back to this question of the Trump peace plan, because I think even though we don't know the details of the plan, we do know what's not in the plan. What's not in the plan is a genuinely sovereign Palestinian state. They may call it a Palestinian state or a new Palestine or whatever, but it's going to be under overarching Israeli control. So that's not a sovereign state. We know it's not going to call for an end to the Israeli occupation. This is an administration that doesn't even believe in the existence of an occupation, very much like the hard right in Israel. And it's not going to call for reaffirming the traditional land for peace formula that is enshrined in Resolution 242. We know that. Those are the three minimal components of a minimally credible peace process. And so I don't think any serious analyst or observer is looking at this plan as though it were a serious attempt to resolve the conflict.
Let's give Micah a couple more seconds before we have to wrap it up just to answer.
Sure. I think not just to answer, but to give it some perspective. I think it's important to recognize that whatever is in the plan, that both sides actually say, let's move ahead with it. They can't just say no beforehand. Otherwise, the plan not just falls, but the future falls. It's important. It's a completely different perspective, and it's important to move ahead. The Palestinians have successfully said no constantly.
Right.
All right. Micah Halpern, Khalid El-Gindi, thank you both so much for joining us.